Hey everyone out there on YouTube, this is Zane and my friend
Lydia.
We're here to do another math video for you today. Now, what we're going to be doing this time is just reviewing what my friend Lydia here learned in her school math class this past week. Lydia, can you tell us a little bit about what this math class was about this past week?
Well, we learned to add and subtract negative numbers and positive numbers.
Now, was this your first time ever hearing about negative numbers before?
No, not my first time.
Okay, so you were a little bit familiar with them to begin with.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So can you tell us, like, what is a negative number?
It is a number less than 0, and the numbers after the negative sign get larger as you get smaller.
Okay, perfect. So what I think would be great for our audience here is if we kind of showed this concept with something called a number line. Okay, are you familiar with number lines, Lydia?
Yes.
All right, so let's do this. So I'm gonna get our sheet of paper up here. Let's wait for it to focus a little bit. There we go. Okay, so let's go ahead. Focus. There we go. So if we were to draw a number line, why don't you give us a tour of a number line? What is a number line and how do we set it up?
Well, normally you would have a 0 in the middle with the positive numbers, with like little tick marks, and the positive numbers to the right of the 0 and the negative numbers to the left of the 0.
Okay, why don't you go ahead and set one up for us just as an example? Okay, so you all out there, you can see Lydia's got that big tick mark in the middle. That's going to represent our 0. She's drawing several evenly spaced tick marks around those.
As even as I can do.
As even as she can do it, yeah. And nobody's perfect. Okay. She got a 0.
We would do like the negative numbers on this side.
Okay, yeah. So for example, like this would be 1, this would be 2, 3, 4, and so on, right? And then over here, we would have the negative versions of those.
Yes.
Okay. And like you mentioned a couple of seconds ago, those get bigger the farther out from 0 that you go, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Why do you think we care about negative numbers? Do you think you ever see negative numbers in real life?
Well, yeah, like if you owe someone money or something, or if you
yeah, that's a great example you just gave us. So if you owe someone money, then you're in the negatives, right?
Yes.
So if your bank account says negative $100, that means you don't even have $100. You owe somebody $100, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So now that we kind of understand what a number line looks like, Lydia already explained that negative numbers are numbers that are just less than 0. Let's start talking about some math involving negative numbers and positive numbers. Okay, so I want to show you a couple different scenarios that you can have in addition and subtraction. Okay, so first things first, let's lay out some different cases here. I'm going to tilt the camera so I can write straight here. So let's suppose that we start out with case number 1, where we have a positive number and we are adding a positive number to that. Okay, now tell me, Lydia, if we had a positive number and we were adding to that number another positive number, could you describe what our answer would be?
It would be a positive number or a number to the right of 0 on a number line.
And how did you know that?
Because in examples like 5 plus 10, it's always a positive number or number greater than 0.
Yeah, because anything to the right of the 0 is positive. Adding means you're just adding on top of that. So you'll never enter the negatives.
No.
Okay, let's talk about the next case. So case number 2. What about a positive adding a negative? Can you describe what that could be?
Well, you would, like if you had 6 plus negative 9, then you would go on the number line 9 spaces to the left until you would get to your number. So you would actually be subtracting.
Okay, so are you telling me, Lydia, then that a positive plus a negative is always going to be negative?
No, because you could also do 6 plus -2 and get 4 instead. It just
Okay.
depends on the situation.
Yeah, so the answer just depends. Okay, so it depends on how big the negative is, right?
Yes.
Depends on how big the negative is. Okay, what do you think case number 3 is going to be?
A negative plus a negative.
Okay, let's do that. So a negative adding a negative. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen in this case?
It would always be negative.
Always, no exceptions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. It's always going to be negative. Why do you think that?
Because on the number line, you would just keep on going to the left, and you would never go back.
Yeah, there's like no way to go right if you're always adding something that's negative. And our last case, what's our last case? What's the only thing that's missing? We did positive adding a positive. We did positive adding a negative. We did negative adding a negative. What about negative adding a positive?
Yes.
Okay, and what would that be?
Well, once again, it would depend on how big the positive was. Because if you had -4 plus like 6, then it would go into the right side of the number line and it would be positive. But if you're just adding like -1, one or two, it would stay on the negative side.
Okay, good. So if the positive was a very small number, you could stay in the negatives, you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now let's switch gears a little bit. I'm going to change colors. Let's talk about subtraction now. Subtraction is where some kind of weird stuff happens. So this up here, this was all for addition. And down here, let's do subtraction. All right, so case number 1, we're going to do the same kind of trend we did up here. So what if we did a positive minus a positive? What's that going to be?
Well, it could be a positive or it could be a negative.
Okay, so it just depends.
Once again, depending on how big the positive is.
Depends, right? Okay, what's case number 2? We got a positive. Let's do positive subtract a negative. Positive minus a negative. Can you describe what that would look like?
Well, the positive would like if you did 4 minus -8, you would go 8 spaces right there, and it would be a negative number. But if you did 5 minus -3, it would still be a positive number.
Okay.
Once again, depending.
Okay, now here's something to remember. You see how we have something minusing a negative. If we wrote that out, minus a negative.
Well, then it would be a pattern.
Yeah. So remember from class that whenever you're minusing a negative, 2 negatives make a
positive.
Yeah. So if I have a positive number and I'm minusing something that's already negative, am I going to be moving to the left or to the right?
To the right.
Yeah, good, to the right, because minusing a negative kind of undoes that leftward motion on the number line. So a positive number minus a negative is always going to stay positive. Okay, let's go number 3 now. What if we did negative? I'm kind of running out of room here, so I'm going to go down here. Negative, I've lost my train of thought, Lydia. Let's do this again. Let's start over. So negative, case number 3. Negative minus a positive. Can you tell us what would happen if I took a number that was already negative and I minus something that was positive? And as an example, let's say I did -2 minus 3.
I think you would go to the left.
Good job. So it would stay
Negative.
negative. Yeah, good. Negative. No exceptions, right? Okay, let's do number 4 now. Last case. If we did a negative minus a negative. Okay, so here we have that double negative case again, right? So if we're ever minusing a negative, it's going to turn into a gigantic plus sign, right? Because 2 negatives make a positive. So if I had a negative, minusing a negative, understanding that it's going to turn into a plus sign in the end, do I know anything about the answer, or does it just kind of depend? And just as an example, let's say I did -2 minus -1. Okay. I got to move my paper down because our audience can see. Let's say I did -2 minus -1. I'll write that out here. -2 minus -1. So we already know the 2 negatives are going to make a what?
Positive.
A positive. So it becomes -2 plus 1, which would give us what?
-3.
Careful. I think you're subtracting. If we're adding from -2, we're going 1 bigger. What are we going to end up on?
-1.
Good job. Yeah. Okay, so that stayed negative, right? But is it always going to stay negative?
No.
Yeah, what if we did like -2 minus -4? Then it would turn into a +4. And -2 plus 4 would get us across 0, wouldn't it?
And it'll be 2.
Yeah, so it could stay positive, could stay negative. It just depends, right? So it just depends again. Okay, now I don't want our viewers to get super overwhelmed here because we just did like 8 different cases. But sometimes it's easier to kind of understand when you kind of lay out every single possibility. Okay, so once again, just not to beat a dead horse here, but positive adding positive is always going to stay positive. Positive adding a negative could stay positive, or it could go negative depending on how big that second number is. Negative adding a negative is always going to go smaller, negative. And a negative adding a positive could cross 0 and become positive. It just depends on how big the positive is. On the subtraction side of things, positive minus a positive could be positive, could be negative, just depends. Positive minus a negative, and this is the real kicker. Okay, so like these 2 rules right here, this is really the ones you got to be careful on. Because minusing a negative, the double negative turns into a plus sign. So whenever you see minus, a minus number, minus a negative, becomes a plus. So a positive minus a negative is always going to stay positive because we're always adding to that number. Okay, and then second to last, negative minus a positive is always going to stay negative. Since we're minusing, we're getting smaller. And then once again, that double negative case rears its ugly head again. A negative minus a negative is going to turn into a positive. So it just depends on how big that number is right here as to whether or not we're going to stay on the negative side of the number line. Okay, so that's kind of the rules. Let's put it into practice now. So we're going to make this a little fun for you, Lydia. Yep, and that paper has stuff on it, so let's get something else. Lydia, I want you to give me 2 numbers right now. These numbers are less than 10. What 2 numbers do you think of very first?
9 and 4.
9 and 4. Okay, we're going to make one of these negative. Which one do you want to make negative?
9.
9. Okay. And I want you to tell me, do you want to add or subtract between these 2? Just what's your first instinct?
Add.
Add. Okay. So here's a practice problem for you. Now, I want you to draw a number line for our audience, so you kind of walk our audience through what you would do to solve this problem, okay? Okay, so we're drawing a nice number line. She's got her 0. Okay, going all the way on the positives. All right. And then let's go to the negatives because we're going to be starting where?
-9.
-9. Okay. Okay, so why don't you put a dot at -9 for us?
Oh, maybe it's right here.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Okay. All right. So now we're taking -9 and we are adding 4. So adding, what does that mean? Are we going to the left or to the right?
To the right.
Good job. So I want you to count 4 spaces to the right from that -9. And where would that leave us?
That would be -5.
-5. So, okay, so we had our answer up here, and I'll go ahead and circle it so we can see it nice and big. Okay. Now back to our cases here. We had a negative number, and we were adding a positive, right?
Mm-hmm.
So down here, a negative number adding a positive, it just depended on whether that was going to stay positive or negative, depending on how big that second number was, right?
Yes.
But since 4 is a pretty small number compared to 9, it was going to stay negative. Okay, let's do another one. Okay, give me 2 more numbers. Let me switch colors too.
6 and 2.
6 and 2. Okay, let's make things interesting. Let's put the 2 before the 6. Which one of these do you want to make negative?
2.
2. Do you want to add or subtract here?
Let's subtract.
Let's subtract. Okay, so we've got -2 minus 6. Now, we're going to take a glance at our rules just to kind of tease what's going to happen here. So we're doing a negative minusing a positive. Okay, a negative minusing a positive. It was always going to stay negative, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's try it out. So -2 minus 6, and you can use the same number line if you want, okay?
Okay. And -2 will be right here.
Okay.
And then you'd be doing 6 this way. So there'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay.
Which is -8.
Perfect. So our answer would be -8.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to throw you one last problem before we wrap up this video, okay? Let's suppose that I did, give me 2 numbers again.
10, 7.
10 and 7. Okay, we're going to keep the 10 positive. We're going to make the 7 negative. And I'm going to ask you to subtract. This is the tricky case, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you know about when you see 2 negatives next to each other?
They become a positive.
So why don't you go ahead and change our problems to show that, okay? Okay, good. Now that looks like a problem you learned how to do back in like 1st grade, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so give us our answer.
17.
All right, so even though this looks really intimidating, the double negatives, sometimes just switching it out for a positive makes the problem a lot easier.
Yeah,
right?
definitely.
Okay, good. All right, let's see our beautiful faces again. All right, so this is our little lesson on negative numbers and how to add and subtract them using the number line. Did you learn something?
Yeah.
All right, good. So what do you think would be the hardest part for someone who is just learning this for the first time?
Definitely the positive minus a negative equals positive.
So the double negative cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What kind of advice would you give to that person who is struggling with this?
To just remember that the 2 negatives cancel each other out, and that
Two negatives cancel each other out. That's a good rule. I love that a lot. I think that's a good rule. And always use your number line if you need it, okay? Number line's there for a reason. Because guess what? If you do this enough times, you're not going to need the number line anymore. You're just going to become that good at it that it's just going to become instinctual to you. All right. So if you like this video that we just did, what do we want our viewers to do?
Click the bell and subscribe.
Click the bell and subscribe. All right. We will see you next time on Pythagorilla.